her political role model is Margaret Thatcher. She played drums in a heavy metal band. It's the product of a moment of crisis for the LDP.
I'm Rosie Blau, co-host of The Intelligence.
And I'm Noah Sneider, the East Asia Bureau Chief for The Economist.
And today we're discussing Japan's first female prime minister.
So Takaichi Sanae, a conservative hardliner, has become Japan's 104th prime minister and the first woman to hold the job. She was elected as the leader of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party earlier this month, and after a few weeks of political wrangling, she emerged in the Diet as the country's new leader today. Her confirmation marks a historic step forward for gender equality in one of the world's most patriarchal democracies. But Takaichi, a security hawk, a fiscal dove, and an arch social conservative, promises to shift Japan's political center of gravity to the right.
She sounds like a slightly surprising choice for prime minister. How did she get to the top?
She is an unusual choice for prime minister, Rosie, in many ways. And I think it's the product of a moment of crisis for the LDP. In recent years, the party has lurched from scandal to scandal. They've lost their majorities in both the upper and lower houses, so now they're leading a minority ruling coalition. And they're seeing support kind of seep to populist upstart parties across the political spectrum. And so the party was really looking for someone different. In fact, the slogan of this year's LDP campaign was quite literally #ChangeLDP. So they wanted someone who would break the mold and help to redefine the party's image with voters and hopefully reestablish its grip on Japan's politics.
And what do we know about her background?
So Takaichi hails from a kind of regular family, a middle-class family. Her parents were a police officer and a salaryman. She grew up in Nara, an ancient capital in western Japan. So she's not a political blue blood like many of Japan's leaders tend to be. She went to a public university. She, in fact, rode her motorcycle to classes. She played drums in a heavy metal band, and she worked briefly as a television presenter before entering politics in 1993. She became a kind of acolyte and really a follower of Abe Shinzo, the late prime minister, long-serving Japanese prime minister. And they shared a vision for Japan focused on sort of national pride and a sense of revival, trying to essentially say Japan is back. She, at the same time, has said that her political role model is Margaret Thatcher. So she kind of fashions herself as an iron lady, if you will. And she has ambitious plans for her country. The question is really whether she's going to be able to implement them, how long she will last in office, and how stable her government will be.
So she sounds like something of a populist, is that right?
I think in stylistic terms, it might be right. She's kind of brash and polarizing and plain speaking. So she has the aesthetic of many other new conservative sort of populists that we've seen elsewhere in the world. But I don't think it's right to lump her in with the MAGA types or the sort of Eurosceptic parties that have risen in the European Union. In many ways, those parties, those forces are anti-establishment. They want to overturn the status quo. But Takaichi is very much of the establishment. She's a long-time lawmaker in the long-time ruling party in Japan. And so she's more of a kind of an old-school conservative in that sense. She wants to preserve the status quo. And I think the LDP turned to her really to fend off the challenge from the true populists who are emerging on Japan's political scene.
So she's of the establishment but has ambitious plans, you say. What does that actually mean in practice?
So I think her vision for the country owes a lot to her mentor and political patron, the late Prime Minister Abe. So there's three components to this. One is a more hawkish stance on security policy, beefing up Japan's defenses, spending more on the security forces. Second is a kind of reprisal of Abe's economic agenda, a new Abenomics, if you will, with loose fiscal and monetary policy and a kind of nebulous growth strategy. And finally, a hardline social conservatism. So while she is Japan's first female prime minister, she's probably not going to be a feminist prime minister. For example, she's lined up on the conservative side of a big culture war issue in Japan, which is whether or not to allow married couples to keep separate surnames. She favors the status quo, which is that married couples should have the same surname.
And you say that national security is important to her and she's going to be spending more on it. What does that mean for her foreign policy?
I think there's a few elements to this, Rosie. One is spending more on Japan's self-defense forces, the armed forces, perhaps even more than the already existing plans, which Japan is pursuing to raise its share of defense spending to 2% of GDP by 2027. The second has to do with her relations with America, Japan's key security ally, and a tricky relationship, to say the least, with President Trump in office. Takaichi bristles at the coercive trade and investment deal that Trump agreed to with her predecessor. At the same time, she knows that Japan needs America for its own security purposes. So pursuing more autonomy, more independent stance at the same time as keeping America close. Again, a tricky dance. And the final piece has to do with Japan's neighbors. Part of Takaichi's hardline conservative worldview is a revisionist view of Japan's wartime past, a view that sees Japanese aggression in the first part of the 20th century as a response to Western colonialism and is, in the eyes of many neighbors, unrepentant for the crimes committed by the Japanese imperial regime. So that could cause big problems in the relationship with South Korea and more friction in the relationship with China.
Noah, you and I have spoken on the show a number of times about Japan's political instability in recent months. Is Takaichi the person to bring stability to the country?
Well, the LDP certainly hopes she is. I think they see her as the best chance to stabilize the party and the country in this turbulent moment. The logic is that by turning to Takaichi and shifting the party to the right, they'll be able to win back voters who've been abandoning the LDP for these more populistic upstarts and essentially reestablish the party's base of power. The strategy, however, is risky. For one thing, there are big fissures between the LDP's more conservative and more moderate wings, and Takaichi is viewed with deep suspicion by folks on the moderate side of the LDP. So those internal party tensions are likely to rise with her in office. There's also the question of the LDP's relationship to the other parties in Japan's political arena. Since Takaichi's selection, the LDP's quarter-century coalition with Komeito, a kind of lay Buddhist party, broke down. Komeito essentially bristled at Takaichi's selection and many of the policies she stands for. The LDP managed to reinforce its coalition by bringing in a new, even sort of further right-wing partner. But the coalition politics under Takaichi are unlikely to be very stable. And finally, it's unclear whether voters are going to love this choice as well. Ultimately, I think for the Japanese public at this stage, the main concern is rising living costs and the pressure that inflation has put on Japanese households. And again, it's unclear whether Takaichi's economic policies will be able to deliver relief from those pressures for the Japanese public.
Noah, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you, Rosie, for having me as always.